Hello and welcome to our now 16th Communications Room Talk. Hartmut and I are happy to have you with us. And we are happy that it looks like with our last Communications Room Talk, when we discussed communications beyond corporate communications or conversations beyond corporate communications, we found something of rather interest for you, and we hope that we will keep that we discuss topics of interest, either the two of us or coming up soon together with guests again. Today, we want to continue a little bit on the topic of new ways of working. We have been discussing this topic one or the other way already. What is new? New is that it looks like we have to again change our reflections about how to work today. You all know in former times, we have spent all the time in the office. Then we had Corona and the tipping year, and everybody who could afford it was in the home office. And now we are again in a kind of transition phase that we have to learn how to work together with people being at home, being in the office, and changing their habits again. And this looks like a new challenge for all that, on one hand, work together in teams, and then, of course, for all who have the task to lead and manage those teams. And so from being in the office to being in the home office to being somewhere in different setups and companies that on one hand allow 100% freedom to work wherever you want to be, to companies who want to get back to the office, and in between a big majority of companies who allow partial home work and partial presence in the office. And maybe we come to the fact that even the word office is being discussed today with the new developments. That's my introduction. And now, having talked already a lot, I would hand over to Hartmut to give his first opinion on the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And yeah, when preparing actually for this talk, I read an interesting article because I also thought which is the right model probably of the future. And this article said that probably there is not this right or wrong. It's not either the office or either home office or a mixture of both, but the task should be actually to come to a state where it doesn't matter where you work, and to in the office find a space where you can of course meet people, meet physically, but that then in the office is also prepared in a way actually that you can bring in people from outside, dial in people in a way, but that this happens in a natural way, so that you have a big screen, that you have cameras, for example, that move, and that people who come in from a remote part actually then have the opportunity to really participate, so that they are not like the second-class passengers in these meetings, but that they can participate in a proper way. And the interesting thing behind this study was that there was a professor in the United States who researched this topic actually for 20 years now, I think. And he said this phenomenon probably hasn't changed even through Corona. But he made a point, and this brings us a bit back to the research that we also did last year with our students and the survey. He said that in the end, the individual purpose of everyone, of every employee, of every manager, of the customers, so the person itself is the starting point. And simply this fact through Corona now got much more obvious. And people who had the opportunity to work from home, they realized this possibility to also think about them. What do I really want, and what do I want to achieve, and also how do I want to work? That this gets more prominent. And you said this is a very individual thing, yeah. So maybe you can find figures by a big survey, and you see 10% want to come back to the office, 71% want to work in a hybrid world, and maybe 30% just want to stay at home or whatever. We also did this kind of survey some sessions ago. But he says in the end, if you want to keep all the people then that you have, this doesn't really matter what the average values are, but every individual needs to find a space. So the future of work needs to find a way then to respect each individual's needs and purposes, so to speak. Yeah? So that this person who just wants to work from home can do it if the job allows, of course, not if you're working on a production line, probably. But if the job allows, and the person who wants to come to the office needs to be able to work to the office, and there needs to be a kind of hybrid space also available where people can partly be physical and partly be remote in this. And this, I think, was quite an interesting and also inspiring thing, because it puts a new demand on communication overall, I would say.
Yeah, this is, so to say, a direct connection to our last communications rooms topic, the conversations beyond corporate communications. That is true. And when we talk about ways of working and models of working, it means that the requirements for those who lead teams or groups or units shift more obviously than ever to communications capabilities. So the technical expertise, of course, is still important, but the communications capabilities are become much more important, because whatever you said means that there are stronger requirements for those who have to build and teams and keep teams together in terms of communication. Because how would you find out and discuss the individual purpose of the people, and even more from those individual purposes come to a common mindset? Because the common mindset is then the thing that brings all the individual purposes together and makes the team have an impact. If there's no common mindset, I would guess there will be no significant results of a teamwork. Only, and the common mindset today now has to be derived from, on one hand, the individual purposes, and on the other hand, the company's purpose. Yeah. And they have to be brought together, and this is, and there I agree completely with you, a genuine communications task. Yeah. Or to put it in other words, where else, if not there, can corporate communications bring in its expertise and support those who have to lead teams in order to make these teams deliver great results.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge challenge and task. So if you look at the scope of the problem, I mean, in the United States, they already use the term the Great Resignation that is happening now. And the study shows, I think, 65% of all employees. I mean, that's a US figure, but I assume it's not completely different here. That they actively look for a new job at the moment, and that's really a huge figure. 65% of the entire workforce.
and
That's quite impressive.
and maybe that's a result of the experiences people made during the last 18 months, which showed them they can stay at home, they can work from home, they can get appreciation from home. So what would hinder them to move just from just one employer to another one, who from their perspective has a better fit with their individual purpose than the current one? So I think I said it last time already, and it's even more true now in this field of discussion. The market moves from an employer market to an employee market. So employees discover that they have their own right and that they have every right to be treated with respect. And this again requires new capabilities of team leaders and managers. And this maybe again is, it's a great development, and it's hopefully a sign that we are really about finally entering the 21st century of working conditions, because the 19th and the 20th century, of course, were centuries where employees haven't been seen as human beings, but just as functions. Of course, in different degree, but still, in principle, the employee has been a function to fulfill a certain task. And now with that accelerated development, again, we have been talking about it dozens of times, we all are at the beginning of a real new time, era, whatever you want to name it, that makes employees complete human beings in their own perception and in the perception of employers. And that's a great development on one hand. On the other hand, again, it puts new challenges on team leads, on managers, and especially then in such a strange thing like the hybrid world.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's a huge challenge and a huge opportunity, I still think, because this now somehow it's really the essence also for me, that communication is getting, and why communication is getting much more important, and looking at communication not just from a media perspective as we maybe did in the past, but in its original sense. So how we can we create and facilitate the dialogue, the listening as part of it, and all this in a world where we do not differentiate between is it a physical meeting or a remote meeting anymore, because that's, I think, the key we need to consider somehow. Yeah? And another aspect also from this study that these guys found out is also that the topic of community now needs to be looked at differently, because in the past you were either part of the community at work and considered the people in the office important, and this was your main community, and then you had a different community at home and in your private life and where you lived in your local community maybe. And this also gets mixed up completely. And again, that's a community. Community is also a communication task, and of course, we thought of community, of digital community, physical communities, event communities, people who met in business clubs, and so on. And this differentiation also doesn't count anymore, really. Because maybe the community at work is not that separate anymore from the community at home, and also work needs to play an active role, and also the employer probably in the community that you have at home when you sit in the home office like we do now.
Yeah.
Or if you are in the office, maybe also then from people dialing in, for example, also some of their private life comes in. So the whole thing is new communities emerge from that are maybe not that separate anymore than we
Yeah.
had them in the past. There's the work
This
community and the other one.
That reminds me of the saying of Günther Baumgartner in one of our last communications rooms talks, who said, "I have the impression that uh, I know my team members much better than before because having a look into their living room, home office, whatsoever, gave me an insight in their private lives that I would not have got in a normal situation." Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Interesting.
Mhm.
I didn't expect that, but it's somehow true. So being more distant gives insight into private details. That's
Mhm.
an almost ironic element of our
Mhm.
new working world.
Yeah, and what we also need to consider, I think, that communities they actually live from communication. What else do they have? They are created based by communication. People find each other through communication, and yeah, that's a huge skill. I think we as communicators can bring in, and
Hmm.
we can also bring in to facilitate and also to look at this, and it's also, I think, true for what we do here. So it's communication rooms that
Sure.
exist more and more, and then that come now more and more into being, I would say,
Yeah.
also in
Yeah.
this, particularly in this hybrid world.
Consciously or unconsciously, let me
Yeah,
put it that way.
yeah.
And it's always better to do things consciously than the other way. Yeah. And of course, then it needs reflection again. So how can we work as a team if some are in the formerly called office and some are at home? So a short remark on why I said formerly office. I participated in a discussion as listener about new ways of working, and one of the participants said, "I don't know whether office is still the right word for uh, what people are coming in today." Because doing office work like calls and working on the screen, writing text, doing analysis, are things that people not necessarily have to come in for. So then they had a short discussion and they were not sure how to name it. Working space, co-working space, cooperation space. So that's something that many people think about today. What reason for do people come in anymore? And there are, of course, different reasons, and maybe we can come to that. But then now I would like to conclude my first idea, how to bring first thought, how to bring people being uh, in the co-working space together with people who are in their individual working space. Let me put it that way, and so that they are all appreciated as and respected as we have been discussing before. And that needs then, on one hand, the provision of the needed technology, as you mentioned, cameras following people and so on, and it needs new moderation techniques. Let me put it that way. So if you have a team meeting with people being in and people being out, you have to take care that the ones who are present don't overtake the whole discussion. And one solution could be that you have two moderators of that meeting, and one of them taking care as primary task, taking care that all those who are participating remotely uh, get their word. Yeah, kind of representative of the remote ones in the present meeting, and making sure that they get their speaking time, that they can bring in their arguments as well as all the others. That sounds very simple, but you have to first of all come to that conclusion that usually, and we all know that because we had those hybrid meetings before, maybe not to that extent, that the present ones always take the lead, and the ones who are remote are somehow lost, and then there is a tendency that they step out mentally. In order to avoid that, think about how to make sure that they have get enough room in the team meeting. Or doing those things like you do in workshops, writing on flip charts and all that stuff. My recommendation here would be everybody in the room or remote use a virtual whiteboard so that everybody works on the virtual whiteboard, no matter whether he or she is present or not. That's another way to create transparency and to create the feeling of trust that you need in a team, and to create the common mindset you need in a team in order to make the team work efficiently and have an impact. Little things, but you have to start thinking about them in that new development of the hybrid world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of details actually that need to come together, and you really need to think it through so that real communication can happen in these spaces. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
then
think it
they,
will also
no,
be more like a new way also of co-working. Just had
yeah,
the term of co-working space also
yeah,
in my mind, and I think offices probably will more develop into this, because I think for a standard meeting where we're on a standard agenda and so on, you do not need to come to the office anymore. I mean, people who are there, they
yeah,
can participate, but you primarily will do it in front of a screen and work together on a
yeah,
document or on an agenda.
yeah,
But then there's this other way of working that needs this exchange. So the communication part, the dialogue,
yeah.
and the
This is
listening, and particularly when you think about innovations that happen when you
yeah,
want to create something new.
yeah,
And this will be a new form of co-working also, I think, that needs a facilitator,
yeah,
a real communicator that looks after it, and that still allows this exchange in a democratic way, so that
yeah,
all participants have their say and that they all actively work together on this. Yeah,
yeah. Or to say in a communications room.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really true. And
Yeah,
yeah, I
we
mean,
could say a communications room is the new way of working together.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Um, yeah, and still, and again, the question is, what is the reason to come in? And one of the reasons I'm pretty convinced is that we all need the social glue. We have been talking about that, I think, explicitly with Günther. Um, and the social glue is something that contributes to creating that common mindset, to creating the trust, to being able to create transparency. And you can create the social glue somehow with online tools. I mean, we've been mentioning something like this, Wonder, where you have a virtual coffee corner or something like that. Still, to create the social glue, it is definitely necessary to bring people together physically from time to time. Of course, you have to define what from time to time means. My experience is for example, with a global team spread all over the globe, where it is not that easy to travel. Still, you need to bring them together at least once a year, not to do workshops primarily. You may do those, but primarily to have fun together, to eat and drink together. And what is valid for such a team is valid for each and every team. I would suggest maybe the frequency is then higher if it's easier to bring them together. But you need to bring, as I said, in a certain frequency, people together physically in order to create and keep the common mindset, to have the social clue, to feel the common culture that you have been working on, of course, online as well, and in hybrid meetings, and so on and so on. And eventually, then you need to bring them together.
Yeah, this also makes sense somehow. I think, yeah. Yeah, and it, like you said, also needs to be seen independent a bit from these rules and regulations some companies now want to come up with. I think because some say, well, all need to come back to the office now. All the conditions are there to return. Others say you can stay 100% outside, and others have a mixture.
Yeah.
And I think all of these solutions somehow do not consider this individual perspective.
Right.
Or,
This is
yeah.
what I just wanted to say. They forget about the individual perspective and the individual purpose people have been now experiencing, that they can have it. And people then would say, okay, if you don't provide me the necessary playing field, let me put it that way, then I would look for another company with a playing field that I like more. Yeah, and therefore you can, of course, put together rules of working or set them up. But the question is, does that really help? Because the individual situations are different. Yeah, and some people may be happy to come back to the office because for whatever reason they have a hard time to do their work at home. And some experienced, oh, I have so many things to do where I need a quiet environment, and this is 90% of my work, and the best way to do that is from home. So I want to stay home. Yeah, and as many individuals you have, so as many individual purposes you will have. And if you want to narrow that down again, you can do that, and there may be good reason, but you should better reflect about your targets and possible consequences of those guardrails that you put together.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it also makes even more sense actually to really focus these physical gatherings for all really on non-work related things, really on the community building then, so to speak, so that this community of the people at work also stays together, because otherwise it will get lost somehow.
Yeah, and maybe if you want to combine it, there are things like the meanwhile famous fuck up talks, yeah, that you can easily make a part of those community meetings where you say, okay, we always want to make our lives easier by having more impact. Yeah? And instead of now talking about a top-down new guardrails announcement, let's talk about how our projects went. That's the fuck up talks. So what mistakes did I make? What were my learnings and all that stuff? This is something that is not at all being spread enough, at least in the German and European world of working, but which is very, very important to, on one hand, to to become better, and on the other hand, to create the trust and transparency that you want to have. And the freedom to talk about mistakes is something that can release the potential of people much more than putting strict rules together, because strict rules require obligation, and to oblige to rules is correlated with fear. And fear is not something that releases creative spirit and innovation. It's the other way around. If you create a situation or circumstances of trust and transparency, then people may be ready to release their ready or able to release their potential and to contribute much more to the common success than being directed by fear. That's very important that I wanted to make before we close the session here.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably also the key point, because this so-called psychological safety, I think it's key to find ways, and even more challenging to find ways to maintain this in this hybrid world we are in at the moment, and it has to do a lot with communication. I'm still convinced. So it depends also a bit on the quality of these communication rooms and spaces that you create, because you can't define this psychological safety or the loss of fear top down. It has to happen between the people that interact and that communicate with each other.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. People who do communications professionally can help here a lot if their partners are willing to have a fruitful discussion with active listening. And this is valid, of course, for both sides. And still, I see a bright future for communicators, for employees, and for companies, because the door has been opened to a real respectful working together, and it's up to us to go through the door and take the direction that we see.
Yeah, I can't agree more. That's the impact we can make, and I think it's also a good closing word, Mark, right?
Yes, thank you for that. I hope that you all who have been viewing and listening get new ideas and that you can take into your daily life, and we would be happy if you would like to give us feedback. And besides that, we are looking forward to our next communications room talk with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. It's been a great pleasure, and see you soon. See you again next week in the communications room.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.